Hi, everyone. Let's move on to stories. In my grandmother's house, there's a rule: never answer if she calls you from the attic, because the one in the attic is not grandma. I always thought it was just a country quirk, a way to keep me, as a child, from climbing around in dusty, dangerous places, and I didn't. But I grew up, and the rule remained. And only tonight did I realize that it wasn't a quirk, it was a survival manual. I arrived in this remote village 3 days ago. The city bustle, deadlines, constant stress. It all got to me so much I wanted to howl. And I remembered my grandmother's house, an island of my childhood, smelling of dried apples, fresh milk, and tranquility. Grandma, Maria Egorovna, was moved to tears by my arrival. She's over 80, walks with a cane, but her eyes are still just as clear and lively. "Grandson, Egorushka, you've come," she fussed, hugging me with her dry, warm hands. I had lost all hope. Come in, I've baked pies for you." The house had barely changed. The same Russian stove, the same embroidered towels on the walls, the same floorboards that creaked as if complaining about the years they'd lived through. I dropped my bag in my room, the former Svetyolka, a small, bright room, and plunged into this unhurried, peaceful life. During the day, I helped my grandmother with chores: chopping wood, carrying water from the well, mending the dried-out fence. In the evenings, we sat on the porch, drank mint tea, and watched the sun sink into the tops of the fir trees. Everything was perfect. Almost. There was one detail I'd noticed even in childhood but never paid much attention to. Sometimes when my grandmother was busy with something, kneading dough, sorting through grains, darning, she would start to hum softly. Not a song, just a melody. Without words. Very simple, just a few notes, but there was a certain flaw in it. One note was always slightly off, creating a barely perceptible but unsettling dissonance. It was like a beautiful melody played on an out-of-tune piano. I put it down to a lack of musical ear. Old people often hum to themselves. I didn't know that this melody was the key. The first warning bell that I ignored. The first crack appeared on the second night. I went to bed early, tired from physical labor and fresh air. My sleep was deep, dreamless. I woke up suddenly as if from a jolt. The house was filled with a thick, rural silence, in which you could hear the stove crackling as it cooled and an owl hooting outside the window. And in this silence, I heard my grandmother's voice. "Egorushka, ah!" It trailed from the first floor. "Grandson, help me, will you?" I sat up in bed. For some reason, my heart started beating faster. The voice was quiet, a little hoarse, as if she didn't want to wake me too loudly. "I'm coming, Grandma," I shouted, fumbling for my slippers. "Need to bring in some firewood. My back is acting up," came the voice from downstairs. I went down the creaky stairs. The large room where my grandmother usually slept on her bed by the stove was dark. Only the embers in the stove's damper cast flickering red reflections on the wall. "Grandma?" I called out. Silence in response. Only a peaceful, steady breathing. I got closer. My grandmother was asleep in her big armchair, wrapped in an old shawl. Her chest rose and fell rhythmically. She was sleeping deeply and serenely. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I stood there, looking at her, and couldn't understand. Who was calling me then? Maybe she was talking in her sleep? Yes, that must be it. She called out and fell back asleep. I tried to convince myself of this, but for some reason, the thought brought no comfort. I felt uneasy, as if there was someone else in the house besides the two of us, someone invisible, who had just spoken to me in my grandmother's voice. I went back to my room and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I lay there, listening to every rustle, every creak of the old house. And it seemed to me that the house was listening to me too. The next day passed in a kind of foggy anxiety. I tried to act normal, but I kept catching myself listening to my grandmother's voice, to the sounds in the house. My grandmother didn't seem to notice anything. She was the same, caring, a little fussy. A couple of times I heard her strange, off-key humming again, and each time shivers ran down my spine. That night, I decided not to sleep. I took a book, lit a lamp, and prepared for a vigil. An hour, 2, 3. Silence. I was already starting to nod off, having decided that yesterday had been a dream after all. And then I heard it. Ego or. The voice wasn't from downstairs. It was coming from the yard. Quiet, plaintive. I froze. I went to the window and carefully moved the curtain aside. The yard was bathed in a deathly moonlight, empty, no one. Grandson, help me, I've twisted my ankle. The voice came from right under my window. I recoiled as if from a blow. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. This couldn't be. My grandmother couldn't have gone outside so quickly and silently. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone, the flashlight. I rushed out of the room, flew down the stairs. Grandma, she was sitting in her armchair again, asleep, just as peacefully, just as deeply. This time I even heard a quiet snore. I stood in the middle of the room, seized by a real primal terror. I wasn't crazy. I had clearly heard her voice, twice, and both times she was asleep. I realized I couldn't pretend nothing was happening anymore. But what could I do? Wake her up? Say, Grandma, your vocal doppelganger is wandering around the yard asking for help. She would think I was drunk or had lost my mind. That night, for the first time, I felt like a stranger in this house, cornered, as if I had fallen into someone else's scary fairy tale, the rules of which I didn't know. I decided to conduct my own investigation. I needed to understand what this damn thing was. The thought of the attic came to me on its own. Never answer if she calls you from the attic. This rule. It was clearly connected to what was happening. During the day, when my grandmother went to the neighbors for milk, I decided to act. The attic door was always locked with a small padlock. I remembered that my grandmother kept old keys in a box in the dresser. After rummaging through a bunch of rusty junk, I found it. A small, time-darkened key. It fit. The lock clicked. I opened the door. A thick, stale smell of dust, old wood, and something else hit me in the face. Something vaguely familiar and unpleasant, like the smell of withered flowers. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam snatched a steep wooden staircase leading upwards from the darkness. Climbing up, I found myself in a huge space cluttered with all sorts of junk. Old furniture, chests, spinning wheels, stacks of yellowed newspapers tied with string. Cobwebs hung from the beams like gray hair. I began to methodically inspect the chests. In one of them, under a pile of old rags, I found what I was looking for: a photo album in a thick leather binding. I sat right on the dusty floor and started flipping through it. Here was my grandfather, young with a dashing fringe. Here was my grandmother, just a girl with 2 pigtails. And here I froze. A photograph of 2 identical girls. Absolutely identical. My grandmother, Maria, and someone else. They were standing, embracing in identical dresses. Only the second girl, unlike the smiling grandmother, had a strange, tense expression. Her smile was somewhat forced, and her eyes stared at the camera with an unchildlike sadness. I never knew my grandmother had a twin sister. I flipped further, and I found another photograph. My grandmother and grandfather's wedding. They are standing there, happy. And in the background, in the shade of a tree, stands her, the sister. She is not smiling. She is looking at my grandmother. And in her gaze is something dark, envy, resentment. In the same chest, at the very bottom, I found a small, shabby notebook. It was a diary, but not my grandmother's, my grandfather's. I opened the last half-empty page. The entries were made in pencil, in a hurried, nervous handwriting. August 12th, 1978. Anna came again last night, stood under the window, and called Maria in her own voice. I almost answered. God, when will this end? August 15th, 1978. Masha is sick, says she has no strength, and I can hear her walking around the house. The floorboards creak. She hums her damned melody. The last entry was made with a trembling hand. She has learned to speak in my voice. Today she called for Masha. I'm afraid for her. I'm afraid for myself. Anna, the twin sister. I sat in the dusty attic, and the world around me was collapsing. Anna, a creature that steals voices, and it lives in this house. I came down from the attic a different person. My grandmother's cozy house had turned into a crypt for me, the lair of an invisible predator. I didn't say anything to my grandmother. What could I say? That the ghost of her dead sister was terrorizing me at night? I decided to just wait it out. 2 more days, and then to the city, far away from here. But it seemed, sensed my fear, or my knowledge. That night, the siege began. I barricaded the door to my room with an old armchair. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed, clutching a heavy flashlight baton in my hand. It started calling me right after midnight. First, in my grandmother's voice, from downstairs. Then, from the yard. Then, from the attic. The very voice I had been warned about. Plaintive, pleading. Egorushka, open up. I'm not feeling well. I was silent. I knew it was a trap. Then it changed tactics. I heard my mother's voice. Son, it's me, Mom. We've come to pick you up. Open up. My heart clenched. The voice was perfect. All the intonations, all the filler words. If I didn't know, I would have believed it. Dad is changing the tires. I came up to see you. Egor, what's wrong? Why are you locked in? I covered my ears with my hands so I wouldn't hear. Then it just started scratching at the door. Quietly, methodically. Scratch, 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 scratch. As if a huge rat was trying to gnaw its way in, and then everything fell silent. I sat in the deafening silence, and it was even scarier. I didn't know what to expect. And then I heard it, that same melody, the one my grandmother hummed. Only now it wasn't being hummed downstairs in the kitchen. It was being hummed right outside my door, a quiet, off-key, maddening tune. I realized it was standing there, right outside the door, and waiting. I don't know how long it went on. The hours seemed to have stopped. I just sat and stared at the door, expecting it to shatter into splinters at any moment. Towards morning, as a gray dawn broke outside the window, everything fell silent. I waited until the sun flooded the room with light. Only then did I dare to move the armchair. The staircase was empty. I went downstairs. My grandmother was sitting at the table, crying, quietly, silently. Grandma, what's wrong? I ran to her. She raised her tear-stained eyes to me. She came, my grandmother whispered. I felt her. She has become so strong. And she told me. Anna, her sister, had died in this house when they were 16. She drowned in the river. They said it was an accident. But my grandmother knew Anna had done it herself, out of envy. She had always envied Maria, her health, her beauty, her fiancé, my grandfather. She didn't leave. Her envy, her longing, her desire to become her sister were so strong that she remained, as a ghost, an echo, an entity that fed on the lives of others. At first, she just appeared as a shadow. Then she learned to move objects, and then to speak. She started with Maria's voice because she wanted to be her. Then she learned to copy others. All my life, I've lived with her, my grandmother whispered. All my life, I've been fighting. I set the rules. Don't talk to her. Don't answer. Don't believe. As long as I was strong, I managed. But now I'm old, Egorushka, and she gets stronger every year. She feeds on my memories, my life. At that moment, we both heard it. The creak of floorboards in the hallway, and a voice, my grandmother's voice. Absolutely calm, every day. Egorushka, where are you? I've made tea. Let's go drink. We looked at each other. The horror on my real grandmother's face was such that everything inside me went cold. She has learned to be in two places, she stammered. It was standing in the hallway, and it was speaking in her voice, while she was sitting here in front of me. It had reached a new level. I remember what happened next, as if in a fog. My grandmother grabbed my hand. Run, she rasped. Run, grandson. Leave and never come back. And you? I couldn't leave her. I'll hold her off. I have to. It's my cross to bear. We heard Ike going up the stairs, to my room. It thinks you're there, my grandmother said. You have a few minutes. I kissed her wrinkled cheek, which smelled of herbs. I'll come back for you, with people. She shook her head. Don't come back. Ever. I rushed out of the house through the back door. I ran without looking back, through the garden, across the field towards the forest where I had left my car. I didn't look back. I started the car and floored it. I drove, and tears streamed down my cheeks. I returned 2 days later, with 2 sturdy men from the city. I didn't tell them about ghosts. I said my grandmother was sick and I couldn't reach her by phone. The house greeted us with a dead silence. We went inside. It was clean, too clean, as if no one had lived in the house for several days. My grandmother was nowhere to be found. We searched everywhere. The house, the yard, the barn. She was gone. I went up to my room. On the bed lay neatly folded clothes, my jeans, a sweater. My bag was packed, as if I was being prepared for departure. And then I saw her, my grandmother. She was sitting on the porch, in her best dress. Her hair was neatly tucked under a headscarf. She looked at us and smiled, calmly, brightly. Grandma! I rushed to her. God, I was so scared! Where have you been? I hugged her. She was somehow cold. I was right here, grandson, she answered. Tidying up, packing your things for the road. She stood up. She moved with surprising ease without her cane. Well, shall we go? She said. It's not good for you to languish in this backwater. I was so happy that I didn't even notice the oddities. We got in the car. The men left in theirs. I was taking my grandmother to the city. I drove and chattered nonstop, telling her how scared I had been. She was silent, only smiling and nodding. As we were approaching the city, I stopped at a gas station. Grandma, I'll be quick. I'll get some coffee. Of course, grandson, she said. When I came back, she was humming something to herself, a very familiar melody. Simple, just a few notes, and one of them was slightly off key.